And now, ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming our today keynote speaker, Francesco Giubilei, and our host, Samuel Trizuljak. Gentlemen, the floor is yours. Please join me in welcoming them. And let me hand the word out to Samuel, who will introduce the guest and the topic.
Thank you very much, Jay. Have a seat, Francesco, for a moment. Good afternoon, everyone. It's my great pleasure to see a good number of you here this evening at Bratislava Hanus Days. My name is Samuel Trizuljak. I am a co-worker of the Hanus Fellowship, and it's my great pleasure to introduce this event with our dear guest, Francesco Giubilei, who came all the way, not from Italy, but from Budapest this week to speak to us in Bratislava. Just a brief thanks to Miriam as well for a kind and interesting introduction to the theme about the meaning of conservatism today and what the possible bounds of it may be. We meet here today to speak about the theme of whether conservatism is the defense of the right and the true defense of freedom in contemporary Europe, in contemporary world. And this is the topic for which Francesco came to address us. And before I give the word over to him, let me just briefly mention a few things from his very interesting CV, an impressive CV for his young age. Francesco is among many other things, the founder and leader of a conservative movement in Italy called Nazione Futura, which is a network and organization of a kind of think tank kind, which unites conservatives all across Italy. They publish their own magazine, they publish and translate a lot of interesting books. Francesco himself is the author of 8 books, most recently a book on the history of European conservative thought, which, as I understand, is being translated into English. So, interesting thing as well. And currently he works as the fellow of Matthias Corvinius Collegium in Budapest, and from there he came to visit us today. So much about Francesco for the start, and it's my pleasure to move to open the floor over to him. So Francesco, welcome, and the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. First of all, good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for your invitation. It's a pleasure to be here in Bratislava, and congratulations for this festival. I think it's a very interesting festival. I read the program yesterday, and I think you have very interesting guests, so congratulations for what are you doing. Thank you again for the invitation, and thank you to be here, and thank you to my friend Don Francesco Giordano. He did yesterday a great speech, and also to my friend Don Lubomir. The topic of tonight is linked to conservatism. And when we talk about conservatism, first of all, we have to say, what is conservatism? I usually do some conference in my country, in Italy, and what is happening every time is that someone tell me, but how can you be a conservative if you are a young person? Because the people imagine that a young person, a young boy, a young girl, cannot be a conservative, because everyone thinks that if you are a conservative, you must be, I don't know, an 80 years old and 19 years old. And this is the first problem when we talk about conservatism, that sometimes people confuse the concept of conservatism and the concept of a conservative with a reactionary. When we talk about a reactionary, we are talking about a person who wants to come back to the past. A reactionary is a person that says, I don't like the society how it is today, and I want to come back in 50 years, in 100 years ago, in 200 years ago. But a conservative is not closed to the innovation. A conservative is not closed to the future. I want to tell you some important writers and intellectuals that talk about the concept of conservatism. And I think one of the most important Italian conservative thinker is called Giuseppe Prezzolini. Probably is not very well known abroad, but Giuseppe Prezzolini wrote a very interesting book that is titled Il Manifesto dei Conservatori, the Manifesto of Conservative People. And in this book, Giuseppe Prezzolini talks about what is conservatism, and he say that a conservative is a person who wants to conserve the so-called permanent principle. Which are the permanent principles? The permanent principles are, for example, the concept of the nation. The concept of the nation is very linked with the conservatism. The permanent principles are, for example, the concept of the family. The permanent principles are, for example, the concept of the identity, a national identity, but also European identity. We will talk about the topic of Europe later. And also the concept of Christianity. And also the concept of, for us as Italian, but also for you as Slovak people, of Catholicism. And Giuseppe Prezzolini also says that a conservative is open to innovation. So a conservative is open to new things in the society, is open to the future, but is open to new things if these new things don't go to destroy the so-called permanent principle. And in the same times, when we talk about conservatism, sometimes the people confuse the concept of conservatism with the classical liberal. You know that in English, when we use the word liberal, is quite different from the classical liberal. In English, the liberal is more or less a leftist person, but the classical liberal, in the American and also in the England tradition, the classical liberal are, for example, writers such as, I don't know, Tocqueville, or in part also Locke, Hume, and also Edmund Burke, but Edmund Burke is also linked with conservatism. And there is a great article written in the 50s by Hayek, and Hayek is maybe one of the most important classical liberal writers. And in this article, Hayek, the title of the article was Why I'm Not a Conservative. In this article, Hayek explained why he's not a conservative, and so which are the difference between a classical liberal and a conservative. The first important difference is the concept of the person. A classical liberal is in favor of an individualistic society. So for the classical liberal, in the center of the society, there is the person. But for a conservative, in the center of the society, there are of course the people and the person, but there is the community. And the community is a group of people who share some values. There is a very important difference between the concept of community and the concept of society. Ferdinand Tönnies, an important German writer, wrote a book titled Community and Society. And in this book, he explained that the society is, for example, unfortunately, all the city where we live in Europe. When we have a walk in Bratislava, or in Rome, or in Madrid, we are living in a society. We see some people that live in our city, in our country, but we don't know nothing about them. Probably we don't share values with them. But the community is something different. Probably tonight we are a community. We are a community because we share some ideas. We share some value. And the concept of the community is very central to the conservatism. And another important difference when we talk about classical liberalism and when we talk about conservatism is linked also on the economic issues. On the economic issues, you know that the classical liberal can be also a liberalist, and so is very open to the free market. And a conservative, especially in Europe, is of course open to the free market. But he understands and he underlines also the role of the state in some, for example, important sector. A conservative underlines the importance of a strong nation, for example, in the defense, underlines the role of important nation in the concept of the sovereignty, underline the role of the nation in the concept of, for example, telecommunication. So, in the economic issues, there are some difference between a classical liberal and a conservative. But especially in Europe, when we talk about conservatism, what is happening is that everyone, when talk about conservatism, think about conservatism like a political theory linked to United Kingdom or linked to United States. This is true in part, but I want to underline that there are some difference between the American conservatism and the European conservatism. We have a different history. We are part of the Western world, of course, together, but there are some important historical difference between the United States and Europe. When we talk about the European conservatism, we talk about a conservatism that is starting from thousands of years ago. And especially when we talk about European conservatism, we have to underline the difference between country to country. You know that we share, of course, some values as Italian, as Slovakian, as Hungarian, as France people, but we have also some difference. And this is good, this is part of our identity. So we cannot compare, for example, a Latin conservatism, that the conservatism of Italy, of Spain, of France, with the conservatism in the center, Europe. Because, of course, you have some different from us. And so I think it's very important to underline which are the difference. And how you said before, I'm here in the so-called Visegrad group. I know that you have some difference between all your country, but what I'm trying to do in Budapest, in Hungary, but also here in Slovakia and also in Poland is try to understand what is happening here. Because I think that as a Western European citizen, as a Western European person, I think that it's very sad that sometimes the Western European countries, such as France, Germany, but also Italy, also Spain, we usually attack your country. We usually don't understand what is happening here. And this is, I mean, quite sad. And I think this is our fault, it's not your fault. And our mistake is thinking in the same way from our society to your society, but you have a different history. We have to understand that, I mean, when in 1968, the people in Paris or in Rome, they want to play to do the revolution, they want to play to become free, but they still live in a freedom country. Here in Prague, you are really fight for your freedom. You were under a communist regime, you were under totalitarianism. And we don't understand this kind of things. So that's also why, because when, for example, the European Union want to impose you some things that are not linked with your history, you say, no, we don't want a sovereign national entities that say us what we have to do in our national country. And I think that sometimes, unfortunately, in Western Europe, we don't understand that. And there are some differences, and are good different, but in the same times, I think that as European people, we share some values, and this is also good. When we talk about European Union, we have to underline which is the difference in the concept of European Union. That is a political concept, and Europe, that is a cultural and historical concept. This is very important. The idea of European Union, born in 1957 with the Treaty of Rome. And the Treaty of Rome, it was the idea behind the Treaty of Rome, it was a treaty to build a Europe of people, a Christian Europe of people, made by De Gasperi, made by Schuman, made by Adenauer, three very Christian leaders. So a Europe based on Christian roots. But what's happening later? Later is happening that in 1992, with the Maastricht Treaty, and in 2004, with the Lisbon Treaty, everything changed. And now we have a European Union that is a political concept based only on economy. So the problem is that until the economic situation was good, so until the 2008, everyone was more or less happy. In Italy, we were one of the more Europeistic people. But after the crisis of 2008, you remember what happened to Greece, for example, the people start to be afraid about this kind of European Union. And also what's happening in 2015 with the migrant crisis. The people start saying, but what are you doing? Why are you making the dream of a unity Europe in this way? But the concept of Europe is another concept. It's a cultural concept. And I think that the concept of Europe started, first of all, with the Roman Empire. It's important to remember the Roman Empire and our roots starting from the Roman Empire. And when the people say that the Roman Empire it was a multicultural empire, they lie. It was a universal empire. That was quite different. And it's very important, the concept of the so-called mos maiorum. The concept of mos maiorum is meaning the tradition of the Roman Empire. When Rome conquered a land, they export the Roman tradition. They export which is the mos maiorum. And which are the concept based in mos maiorum? It was the concept of fides, for example, loyalty. It was the concept of pietas, so devotion, respect. It was the concept of gravitas, charity. But during the Roman Empire, what happened? Happened that the Roman Empire became a great Christian empire. We have to remember, for example, in 1312, the famous Battle of Ponte Milvio, where Constantino, the empire Constantino, became a Christian emperor. And he say, before the battle, in hoc signo vinces. And inoxin vinces is meaning that it became a Christian empire. And so today the role of the church is not a multicultural church, it's a universal church. And the concept of universalism is quite different from the concept of multiculturalism. Because when we talk about multiculturalism, and Roger Scruton, one of the most important conservative writers, explains that in a very good way, multiculturalism is losing our identity, is losing what we are. But universalism is quite different. It's meaning that the Catholic Church can spread all over the world this message with this tradition. So it's very important to underline which are our Christian roots. And also in the Middle Age, you know that everyone today, when we talk about the Middle Age, people say, oh, you want to come back to the Middle Age in a very bad way. But during the Middle Age, there were also some good things. I remember, for example, the role of some important women, like Santa Chiara, like Santa Rita. There were some important Christian women. And we can talk about the Middle Age, where the concept of the wall to defend a city. And I mean, look at here. We have the wall, and the wall coming from the concept of limes in the Roman Empire. And a wall is important, is to protect who we are, is to protect our identity. And it's like a metaphor to protect our country, our identity. And we have to defend our identity. We have to defend our Europe. Here, we are near Vienna, and in Vienna in 1683, there was the famous Battle of Vienna against the Ottoman Empire. But we can also talk about Lepanto, the famous Battle of Lepanto in 2071. We can talk about Marcantonio Bragadin, a very important Venetian person who fight to defend Christianity all over the world. I think this is our Europe, a Europe based on Christian roots. But what is happening? It's happening that with the French Revolution in 1789, everything changed. The French Revolution, with the so-called terror, with the Jacobin view of the society, destroy the so-called Ancien regime, but destroy also the values that are based on our society. And the American and the English conservatism born in 1790. So 1 year later, the French Revolution, with the book written by Edmund Burke, The Reflection on French Revolution. And Edmund Burke explained how was bad, in a certain way, the French Revolution. But we can also talk about de Maistre, an important French writer. We can talk about Donoso Cortés, another important counter-revolutionary from Spain. They explain how was dangerous this kind of revolution, where they killed the people, they killed the king. And after arriving in our day, I think there is another here that changed the history. I already talked about this here, and this 1968. What happened in 1968? In 1968 happened that there was an attack to the concept of the authority. The concept of the authority in the family and in the school. And how you know which are the two most important entities to grow up a children? The family and the school. And with the 1968 happened that the authority of the father and of the mother was destroyed. And the authority of the father, especially coming from the Roman Empire, the concept of pater familias, it was totally destroyed, the importance of the family. And the same in the school. In the school where the students, they don't recognize the authority of the teacher. They don't recognize anymore the authority of the professor. And from 1968 happened another important things. Happened that started the so-called cultural hegemony by the left. The cultural hegemony by the left is the concept that is written for the first time by Antonio Gramsci. Antonio Gramsci was the founder of the Italian Communist Party in 1924. You know that in Italy, fortunately, after the Second World War, we were a democracy, but we had the biggest communist party of Western Europe. And the idea of the Communist Party was based on Antonio Gramsci writing. And Antonio Gramsci explained how it's important to have a cultural hegemony in the school, in the university, in the media, in the newspaper. And that's what is happening now, that the liberal, the leftists control all these media, this academic world. And that's what is happening also in our university with the so-called cancel culture, with the so-called political correctness. And in the same time, today we are living some other problem. We usually say that the past century was the century of nihilism, how Nietzsche explained. But I think that we are living in the century of relativism. And there is a great book written by the Cardinal Ratzinger, Pope Benedict, with Marcello Pera, another important philosopher. And the title of this book is Without Roots. And in this book, they explain how is dangerous the concept of relativism, that everything is relative, that there are not rules, that a family is not made by a man and a woman, these kind of things. And so we are living in the society made by relativism. We are living in a society based on multiculturalism. I already told that. And so, to finish, I don't want to be too long. What we can do today? I think that conservatism can really be the street for the future, the opportunity for the future. Because conservatism is not like populism. I mean, when we talk about populism, also when we talk about the so-called national populism or souverainismo, is the word in our country and also in France, souverainism, we're talking about a new political theory without history. But conservatism has a great history. The American and the British conservatism, starting after the French Revolution with Burke, with Scruton, with other important authors. But our conservatism, as I tried to explain you today, starting from the Roman Empire and starting from the Christian roots, is a conservatism linked with the past. So we still have our roots. That is very important. But in the same times, we have also to rediscover some issues that we are losing. And I want to finish talking about, I mean, I know that it is quite a difficult topic, but I think it's very linked to the concept of conservatism. And what is happening with the very sad situation of COVID is that we understand the importance of some things that we are losing. We are living in a society based on the idea of the French Revolution, based on the idea of enlightenment. So in a society based on the materialism, it's a society made by rationalism, where the man he thinks to be like God, where a man, everyone feels to be invincible. But we are not invincible, and the COVID explains that. An illness that is hidden to everyone arrived, and in one day to the other, some people died. And we understand how as people, how as person, we have to also to understand that there is not only the material life, but there is also spiritual life. We understand the importance of the spiritual line. And in the same time, we understand the failure of the globalization. We live in this very globalistic society where if you have a work in London, or if you have a work in Tokyo, or if you have a work in New York or in Paris, you work for the main street, for the main course, there are the same shops, the same people, and the people dress in the same way, and it's a very egalitarian society, like sometimes it was in the communist era, but it's the other side of the vision. So we understand that globalization is not a good thing in every way. And we understand the importance of the nation. We understand that when there is a problem and we need masks, we need someone to help us, it's important to have an health sanitary system in our nation, because a sovereign entity nation can't help us. So we understand how is important the nation. And we understand also the importance of patriotism. What is happening, for example, in Italy, we were, unfortunately, in Europe, the first country. You remember that last winter we had a very, very strong COVID situation. After China, I think in Europe we were the first country. And people take off from their window our national flag. People sing our national hymn because they understand how it's important to feel part of a community. We understand how it's important not to be alone, to be part of a community. We understand the importance of solidarity. So I think that we have to understand from what is happening in the last year, we have to understand in some way change our way of life, but in a good way. We don't have to forget the lecture of the COVID, but in the same times, we have to defend for our freedom. We have to understand that is very important to fight for our freedom, and in the same time, of course, to fight for our health. So we have to try to find a way to fight for this issue. And I think that conservatism can really be the opportunity to do that. And I think that we need to rediscover, and I really finish, we need to rediscover a Europe based on nation. We need to rediscover a European Union that is not the United States of Europe, this very bureaucratic institution, but is a Europe of nations based on our identity. And we have to rediscover our history, we have to rediscover our tradition, we have to rediscover our Christian roots, but in the same times, we have to fight for our future. We have to care about young generation, we have to talk about family, we have to talk about the problem of birth rates, that is a very, very important problem for our civilization, for the Europe and for the Western civilization. So these are the things that we have to fight, and I think that conservatism can really represent the way to do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Is this working? Oh, yes, we are working. Thank you, Francesco, for your insightful talk about the genealogy of conservatism, about its roots in different parts of Europe and different parts of the West, as well as for your assessment of the challenges that we face today as conservatives. And just before we get onto the questions, I would like to invite on the stage with us Miriam Lexmann, the Honorable MEP. Miriam, do come and join us for the talk, for the discussion. So let me ask the first question to Francesco. So you have provided us, Francesco, with a very interesting and insightful genealogy of conservatism in Europe, of its rich roots. We have much to look back to, much that can inspire us. But one, I think, main challenge perhaps to some of the thoughts that you have raised could be that as great as it sounds in your talk, it doesn't seem as if conservatism was the most appealing force in the public square in the Europe of today. You know, there are some very loud conservatives. You know, there is the famous coalition now of Matteo Salvini, Viktor Orban, and Mateusz Morawiecki, who are trying to do a bit of kind of conservative aligning together on the European level. But regardless of how we, let's say, assess or evaluate their efforts, I think we can fairly say that they are not the ones who are dictating the rules of the game. Which is, let's say, an assessment of the political level. As you said, also on the kind of level of young people, you started your talk with the idea that it's kind of strange to introduce yourself as a conservative if you are a young person. You know, we've all been through university recently, well, us recently, many of the audience. So my question to you is, how hopeful can we really be about conservatism being the way forward in Europe? It doesn't look as if that was the case if you read the main headlines today.
I think that thank you for the question. I think that the best way is to build bridge from country to country and to try to build a network. What we are missing today, I think, is a conservative network. And from the liberal world, it's quite different. They are very organized. I talk about the concept of cultural hegemony. They have universities, they have schools, they have newspapers, they can use in a very good way the social media. They are cool in some way. They can arrive to young generation, to young people. We cannot do that. And so we have to think about that, and we have to try to build some bridge. And I think that is very, very important also to try to create a network between the Central and Eastern European and Western Europe. I mean, in Visegrad countries live 64 million of people, more or less. Like France, more than Italy. So, I mean, this part of Europe is very important. And there are very important things that you are doing in this part of Europe. But sometimes we don't know nothing about what is happening here. I was very surprised. I was in Poland for the inauguration of a university 2 weeks ago, and in the conference there were more or less 150 people, so a lot of people, and I was the only one from Italy. There is no one from Spain. I think there was one guy, only one person from France, And the same sometimes happen in Western Europe when we do some cultural events as conservative. We only have people from our country or from Western Europe. So I think what is happening now is that there is a very, very difference between the two parts of Europe. And as conservative, we have to try a way to fight each other. If we have a battle for family, and only a Slovak person or a Slovak party or a Slovak intellectual talk about that, I mean, probably they don't listen to you. But if you do that, the Hungarian do that, the Polish do that, the Italian do that, the French, and we can continue, all together, talking about the same issue, something can change. And I mean, I think it's very, very important to build a network, and is that what we have to thinking about in the next years?
Thank you for your answer, but I will try to challenge you a little bit more. Just let's suppose that we all learn Polish, the Italians learn some Slovak, and we all get much better in networking and in supporting one another. There's more cooperation on the European level. It still seems like when we try to do that, like the let's say Peace Fidesz coalition or with Salvini on the European level, it gets really bad PR and gets a really, really strong backlash. It sounds like even if European conservatives, let's say of a more delicate kind and of more, let's say, antagonistic kind get together, still if we look at the results, it sounds like there's still a really strong backlash. I mean, I will give the word to Miriam in a moment, but just recently with the debates about the Matic report, which concerns reproductive rights and issues of family and gender in the European Parliament, there's a lot of networking going on, but in the end it seems like we are losing these battles, and if people do try to unite, there's this saying in Slovakia to try to catch the horse by the tail. It sounds as if we get together, but then we still lose. So, what's your view on that?
Yes, because we have a problem. We have to admit that we have a problem, and our problem is sometimes, and I really want to listen also to our MP friend, because I think that our problem sometimes is that the cultural and the intellectual world is disconnected from the political world. Maybe here is different. I don't really know the Slovak political situation, so I'm not talking about your country. I'm talking about my country, and they talk about some other countries that I can know well. And the problem is that sometimes when the Conservative Party or the center-right party go in power, they don't have a cultural world that is behind them. And this is a big problem. It's a very strong problem, because you cannot govern with only Facebook and Twitter. You cannot govern with only slogan. You have to build a structure. It requires time, of course, but if you never start doing that, I mean, there is a problem. I want to talk about the Hungarian situation, for example. In Western Europe, everyone attacked Hungary, because I don't repeat the things because you already know these kind of things. But what is happening is that they are trying to build a cultural and intellectual world. And I think it's good. And it's also good, what are you doing here with this festival? I think it's great that you are inviting some people from all over Europe. You invited Rod Dreher, for example, so also some important writers from United States. And it's important to build a relation. But what we need is that when the center-right or the Conservative Party go in power in a country, in a city, starting also from the small community in a city council, they have to have behind them or near them some intellectual people that they can help them. Some people from the media, some people from the school, some people from the community. And the left, they had that. Unfortunately, sometimes we don't have that, and we have to think about it.
Thank you. Miriam, we have just discussed about how perhaps the problem for conservatives in Europe is not enough networking, not enough getting together, not enough bridging. I know that you do a lot of this kind of work behind the scenes in the European Parliament and beyond, also in your previous work as the president of the IRI in Brussels. So how do you assess the situation? Is conservatism the way forward? Are you happy with the way how the European conservative scene currently looks like, how it's represented?
Thank you, Samuel. I see 3 points why we are losing. Point number one is that I think we got rest assured that we are the majority. In most of the countries, the Christians, I mean traditional or like church goers or those who consider themselves because they were baptized or come from a Christian family, they were, I would say they were, because now we know that the numbers are changing, in the majority. So practically they thought like, we don't need to do much. In many of these countries, the central right or conservatives or Christian Democrats were in power. So we felt that it's taken care of. We don't need to be active. We don't need to do something. Rather than the progressives, and I deliberately don't call them liberals because what Francesco already explained and I tried to kind of briefly explain, the progressives, they were in a minority. They were in a fight since the Soviet Union and then came to the West and were trying to gain the cultural area, the schools, the academia, culture, and dominate there. So they were always trying to fight for how they see the truth or how they see the society. Rather than I think we have given up because we felt that everything is under control. The Christian democratic parties have also changed, and many of them, I don't think that they are now defending really the values which stand in their names. The second question, or the second reason I see, is that what I tried to explain at the very beginning, that the progressives, they have the kind of image of the ideal society, so they practically have answers to everything. They don't seek truth, they believe that they already have the truth. We believe that the truth was given to us or emerged to us, but on the other hand, we still know that we cannot comprehend and cannot embrace the truth completely, because that's a journey we need to do during our life. So that kind of divides us, because obviously we this allows for dialogue, for different opinions within the conservative or Christian democratic society. So that's why we are not so organized, because we are also divided on many issues, because each of us has maybe different approach to the individual questions. And the third reason, which I see, I mean, when I compare the situation, or when I look at the situation today, that for me, unfortunately, many of the conservative leaders who are proclaiming that they are the kind of those who try to kind of change the history and make conservatism the dominant political power, I think in many political questions, because they try to be popular, they're deviating from from the Catholic teaching or from the truths which I believe are the core truths of the conservatism or Christian democracy. And that makes us even weaker, because obviously it's very difficult to argue why this particular leader is the kind of true conservative or true Christian Democrat, when I concretely, and especially in foreign policy, I see that there are answers these conservative leaders provide which I think are deviating from the truth, because they want to keep the popular pressure or the popularity behind them.
Thank you for your answers, Miriam. And you discussed, both in your second and your third point, the distinction, let's say, between conservatism and Catholicism, between calling oneself conservative and appealing to Christian heritage and Christian values, and actually trying to live them out integrally. And as you say, sometimes those who are among the loudest and who present themselves as conservatives in the public square don't do particularly well in terms of perhaps representing that in their own life and in their policy as well, as you mentioned, in foreign affairs. So my question to both of you is, I mean, this talk this evening is about conservatism, but as I understand it, all of us, three of us here sitting here, are actually practicing Catholics as well. Shouldn't we change the perspective and the perception, and shouldn't we be talking about our faith and Catholicism and about how great that really is? Let's put it this way. I can't see any of my secular friends, transforming their life because of, the conservative worldview. But I have had friends who changed their life because they started believing in Jesus and they have a real experience of faith. So, of course, that's going to be scary at the first sight, and for many people that will be, oh, you are proselytizing and so on and so forth. But my challenge to you is, shouldn't we, rather than being conservatives, shouldn't we just be much more evangelistic as Catholics? Miriam can start, and same question for Francesco as well.
Too difficult. I hope that I will be second one so I can think, but it's a difficult question. I wouldn't go down this road, because I think we need to also have the church and the state separate. Because that would kind of fall into the danger to bringing the church and state and kind of confusing people. So I think that what is important is that there are kind of lines which people could adhere to, and also the people who are not believers or who are maybe not so much practicing, that they could feel that they are integrated. And then, obviously, I think the kind of the truth of evangelism and the examples of these people who are, I would say, practicing Catholics or practicing Christians, that could draw the people to the church. But I think in a political spectrum, we want to draw them to the political kind of, I don't know, the kind of the political party or political movement, and I would keep these two things separate. And obviously, I think, for us as Christians, what is more important is not to win the elections. For us, what is more important is to live life which is true to God and kind of try to be saved and try to help others to be saved. So I think this is two different ways and two different, I would say, purposes of our life. One is to do our best that we are saved and we draw others to Jesus and to God. And the second part is to be active in a society, and obviously through as a politician, through my political work, I also try to point out to Christianity, obviously, but I wouldn't merge these two completely together.
I see. Francesco, you are described in the media as the rising conservative thinker in Italy. Why aren't you described as a rising Catholic thinker?
No, I think that if you are a conservative, especially in Italy, you are a Catholic. You are a Christian and you are a Catholic. Probably in other countries can be different, but in general, in Europe, if you are a conservative, you have to care about Christianity. And I feel a Catholic, and I think that it's important to have also a spiritual guide. I mean, in the life, we also have to underline the importance of the spiritual aspect of our life, and we need some spiritual guide, and our spiritual guide are the priest and is the church. So we have to follow the church from an intellectual life, and I think that it's also important for the church to follow the tradition of the church. And what we are looking for, especially in this moment, this is a very difficult moment of our history, because we are living on the one side the secularization of the society. There is a very important Christian Catholic philosopher that I think is one of the most important philosophers of the past century. He was called Augusto del Noce, and del Noce wrote some important books where he explained how the concept of secularization of the society is becoming every day and every year a very important issue. And in the same times, we are living some problem with other religions that are coming in Europe, and they have other rules. They live in a different way. We never talk about the problem, but it's a problem that we have in Western Europe. I mean, with migration, it's a kind of problem. We cannot delete this problem or never talk about the problem of a certain point of migration. We are not against, as a conservative, in the immigration in general, because we understand that it's part of the world of the life, the concept of migration. But there is a big difference from legal migration and illegal migration. And there is a big difference from an immigrant that comes to a country and respect the law of this country, understand the history of the country, and the difference with immigrants that come to another country and want to delete which are the law of this country or the country where he's going to living, and want to impose another tradition. That's not working. I mean, we have to underline the importance of Christian roots, because when we talk about Catholicism, when we talk about Christianity, we are talking about a religion, but we are talking about our way of life. We are talking about of who we are. Also, the people that they don't define themselves Catholic or Christian, but they born in a Christian and a Catholic country and society. In some way, they are influenced by our way of living, and in some ways they are influence of our way of imagining the society. So if we delete this, and if we give to some persons that come from other country, from other civilization, other culture, the possibility to delete our society, and if we, and I want to quote again Roger Scruton, because it's another important concept, if we want to accept the concept of oikophobia, so hate for our house, hate for our land, hate for our country, we cannot accept this concept, because it is a way to destroy our Europe, it's a way to destroy our country. So I think it's very, very important to defend our Christianity and to defend also, as a Catholic, our religion, because it's part of our identity.
I will try to just hold on to this topic for a little longer. You, Francesco, discussed the issue of religion in the context of migration, and I mean, the thing with migration is that, of course, these migrants come here from the Middle East, and they are very often enthusiastic about living out their faith in the public square. One of my favorite writers is Michel Houellebecq, who I'm sure I don't need to introduce you to you, who famously wrote a novel about how France is going to become an Islamic state by 2030 or whatever. But this is kind of what I'm talking about. Shouldn't we be putting more resources, more of our talent, more of our best thinking and best work, not into being conservatives, but in being just confident in our faith and being proud of it and being just more open about it and evangelistic, on various levels. Are there any initiatives that are encouraging or that you like in this respect? Anything that gives you hope that Christians or as Catholics we are doing some work on this front? Because it seems to me that we spend a lot of time talking about conservative values, but not enough time talking about just why we believe in Jesus and why that is a good way to live for us, and how that might be a good way to live, or to at least to get to know about for other people as well.
I think that we have to do both these kind of things. I mean, we have to defend what is Christianity, and in the same times we can talk also about conservatism from a political perspective. I don't think that if we defend conservatism in politics or in the society, we cannot defend Christianity. You talk about migration. I think it's a crucial issue. I mean, especially for the Mediterranean area, you live in a country that is in a part of Europe where you don't have direct migrants. Okay, you have the so-called Balkan routes, so some migrants that probably pass through your country to go to Germany, but you are not, for example, like Italy or Spain or Greece. But what is happening in our country is a very sad and dangerous situation. In Italy live more or less 500,000 of people that are illegal migrants. They live inside of our country. We don't know who they are. We don't know their name. We don't know what they do. And this is not solidarity. Solidarity is open the border to people who enter in a country in a legal way. We know who they are. We try to find a job to them. We open the country to a regular number of people. But what is happening now is that a lot of people enter in our country, or enter in Spain, enter in Greece, and you know what is happening in the south of Italy? That thousands of people that are illegal works for mafia. They work for the legal organization. Because they arrive in a country, they don't know what to do, they start sell drugs, and I mean, also for them, it's against the vision of a Christian. I mean, as Christian, we have to help people. Of course, we have to help people. Of course, if there is a war in Africa, we have to try to help these people. I totally agree. But it's not helping people in this way.
If I can just jump into it very quickly, I'm looking for some kind of positive, concrete examples. Recently when I don't follow Italian media too closely, but I heard a story about how Matteo Salvini was waving his rosary during a speech in the Italian Senate or Parliament or wherever. Maybe that's a good example, maybe that's a bad example, but what is the right way to present the ideals of Christian, of Catholic life? Are there some success stories? Just very briefly, this question to you, and then to Miriam, and then we move on to Slido as well.
I think that the best way is that everyone in every day and in all of job of us try to split the Christian message. So you can do that as a politician, I can do that in the cultural war, you can do that in your university. So I think that everyone in his life, in his job, has to follow which are the Christian values, and has to try to convince also other people which are the best part of Christian values. I think this is the best way. You talk about Salvini and when he had the Rosario. You can imagine what is happening the day later. That all the liberal media and everyone start attack him and say, okay, you are not a real Christian, because if you are a real Christian, you don't have to show in public your Rosario, you have to do it by yourself, not in front of a camera, not in the parliament. This is a politicization. Sure. But it's a way. And people talk about this topic. You can agree or not, but they talk about
Fair
it.
enough. Very briefly, the same question to Miriam. Are there any inspiring success stories that inspire you, or that you would point at, or is there? What's the right way to do it? If perhaps Matteo Salvini isn't the one, or perhaps it is.
Thank you very much. What I mentioned already before is that we should be true to the truth which were given to us, and try to live our lives accordingly, and maybe not deviate because of, I don't know, me as a politician, that I know that when I say certain views, that these views will not be liked by the majority in my country, and I might not be re-elected. That the same is for a person who is in academia, or, I mean, in any job. I mean, we know that now, unfortunately, Christians are under pressure. Some polls are showing that people who are practicing Catholics, that they feel ashamed to share with their colleagues in the job that they are practicing Catholics. Our views are being seen as radical. Practically, protection of life from conception to natural death is already portrayed by the progressive media as something radical. So what I think is that we should not shy away from what we believe in, because that's very important, that we are sharing, we are giving the example. And also, what we need to try to do is to show the good example and point, because we don't have these leaders who would be the kind of, that's the leader of a good example. The church is doing enormous work with socially deprived people, with people, for example, also helping mothers who are in a difficult situation, trying to decide if she will carry her child to birth or not. And church is helping, and the church base or whatever NGOs which are somehow coming from the Christian field are helping these women, are helping families in a difficult situation. After all, during the migration crisis, even until now, the church-based organizations or even priests and nuns and orders help the refugees, not only the Christians, but also helping Muslim people who are creating a kind of protection zones in Syria, for example, risking their own life to protect people in Syria. And in other areas, Pakistan and other countries. So practically, I think we need to point out to this, that examples of what people are doing because of their faith and how they serve the others. And I think this is the part what probably needs to be kind of bring to the attention of the others, and slowly maybe people who are kind of that they follow the trend because they're afraid of understanding our point of view, but then after a while, if they will see the examples, they might change their viewpoint, they might change their faith, they might change at least the position that we are radical. So maybe that's what we need to do.
Sure. Thank you, Miriam. Now some time for questions from Slido. I shall briefly say that we also encourage live questions from the audience, and you are free and welcome to ask a question in Slovak as well, and I shall gladly translate. So I'm sure some charming assistant will be down there with the microphone in a moment. We'll try to go through as many questions as we can, so perhaps try to keep your answers brief. The first question, probably for Francesco, mostly. If conservatism is about rejecting change that goes against the permanent principle, then if such a change were to come about, doesn't a conservative have a duty to become a reactionary, to try to restore in a reactionary fashion the past state of things?
Okay, it's quite interesting. Thank you for the question. I think there is a concept that is quite interesting, that is the concept of conservative revolution. When we talk about revolution and conservatism, we talk about something that in a first way is like something opposite, because or you are in favor of revolution or you are in favor of conservatism. But in some part of the history, when the so-called status quo is not still respected, so it's meaning that the so-called principal values are not respected, we have to go to the so-called status quo ante. So we have to restore the original status quo. And in this case, we have to do like a conservative revolution. When I use the word revolution, I'm not using the word revolution in a Jacobin or in a French Revolution way, of course. I'm talking about more a cultural revolution. And the concept of conservative revolution was a concept that was, for the first time, written by a German writer in 1920. His name was Van den Broek. And Van den Broek explained this concept of conservative revolution. And also in Italy, there was a movement. The name of this movement was Strapaese. And this movement was opposite to Straccittà. Straccittà is meaning a movement, a modernistic movement in favor of the big cities, so it's the modernity. And Strapaese is meaning a movement in favor of small community. So a small city where there are the church, all the traditional entities. And I think the concept of a cultural revolution can be an opportunity to try to restore the conservative value.
I'll jump in your speech. Just very quick answer from you. Is it the time for a conservative revolution now? 2 sentences at most.
I think that now is, of course, a timing to change how is the situation before it's too late.
Thank you. Miriam, the next question is for you. Very briefly, which 3 policies at the level of EU would you push forward to, if you could, effectively, to increase freedom?
Wow, this is a difficult question. I would probably say, I mean, it's not really a policy, but one thing which I believe that it's absolutely vital is that the EU adheres to the subsidiarity principle, and the EU institutions are not doing any steps in the areas which don't belong into the competencies of the European Union. So what was the discussion about Matic, that is not a legislative proposal, but I believe that even the non-legislative proposals, the non-legislative steps of the Commission and the Parliament should not be in the areas which don't belong to the competence of the European Union. And I would say maybe here, maybe that's the only principle I can only use, but I would also use try to kind of remember the quote of John Paul II, because he practically said that the subsidiarity principle is helping that the institutions are doing what is their role, and if they are kind of deviating from it, that practically are omitting to do the good in the area where they should. So practically this is I think the EU will be what it should be when it will not interfere into competencies of the member states.
Okay, so subsidiarity number 1 policy, and very briefly 2 sentences, second policy and third policy.
I mean, I don't call it policies, but maybe the second one would be more principled foreign policy. I mean, we are practically having different approaches where we have political or economic interests, we deviate from our values in foreign policy very often.
How would that increase freedom? I mean, just in the context. The question is asking how to increase freedom, the policies to increase freedom.
Yes, this will definitely increase freedom, because I think this, the kind of deviation in the foreign policy and having double standards for our member states and or for our policies for the member states or within the European Union and our policy in our foreign policy, if we have double standards, that practically is limiting us, because it's corrupting in a way our own views of what our values should mean. So maybe that would be the second, and the third. Well, I don't know. I think these 2 probably are enough.
Maybe two is enough work. Next question for Francesco. Then we'll take one from the audience here in the Palfi Palace. In Slovakia, conservative political parties or civil organizations based on Christian principles on the one side and on the national principle on the other side. So Christian-oriented and nationally-oriented NGOs and political parties, they don't really cooperate and act together. So there's the split between Christians and nationalists, let's say. So poses the questions. What is the situation in Italy on the national front and the Christian front?
Situation in Italy is...
Two sentences.
Okay. You can imagine the situation in Italy is very confused, as always.
3 sentences then.
Okay. So we can say that now we have a big government, that our Prime Minister is Mario Draghi, the former European Bank president, and the government of Mario Draghi is led by a big coalition from the extreme left to the left of Partito Democratico, to the populist party of Movimento 5 Stelle, to the center-right of Forza Italia, a classical liberal party led by Berlusconi, and from Lega of Matteo Salvini. And in the opposite way, so the opposition to Draghi is only made by Brother of Italy, that is the political party of Giorgia Meloni. So when we talk about the center-right of Italy, we talk about a coalition that is made by Forza Italia, Lega, and Brother of Italy. And they go together in the election, for example, of the city council. They go together in the regional election. They are going to go together in the next national election, but in this moment, they are split. So Forza Italia, classical liberal political party, Lega, we can define a revolutionary conservative party or maybe a sovereignist party, are with Draghi, and Brother of Italy, they define themselves a conservative party. They are in opposition to Draghi. So, to answer to the question, there is like a split in this moment in the center-right between 2 parties and 1 party.
Okay, thank you. Next question for Miriam. Is there a list of principles that you would suggest that conservatives both in Western and in Central Europe would sign? What would be on the list of these principles? So conservatives both in the Western and in the Central Europe, what would be the principles that the Western European and the Central European conservatives can agree on? Maybe try to say 3 or 4 principles or maybe more.
I think the protection of life from conception and to natural death should be definitely one. Although, I mean, there is the question if those who consider themselves conservatives but not Christians, then obviously it's a question, but I believe that this should be the truth which should be protected. I think maybe what needs to be kind of, that would be the revolution, but not the radical one, is to kind of bring back the concept of human rights and concept of civil society into our thinking. Because I think both of them come naturally from the Catholic social teaching or from the kind of conservative ideas, but we have lost them vis-a-vis the progressives. Now, when we talk about civil society, everybody understands the NGOs which are extremely progressive. When we talk about human rights, everybody understands because, or it's spoken most of about the rights of women to have abortion, which is now the huge discussion. So I think that what we need to go back is to the kind of core principle, what protects human dignity, what are the truths about man, and then what are the kind of human rights which we need to, and freedoms which we need to defend. And the second thing is to defend the civil society as a kind of the creative part of a society which practically cherish freedom of individual, cherish family, but also a kind of community which can be helpful or is helpful in the social and economic matters of a society.
I will pose the same question to Francesco. You mentioned that one of the jobs that you currently have, or one of the things that you strive to do in your work, is to explain the Eastern European or Central European conservative point of view to the Western European conservatives. So what would you say are the lists of principles? What is the list of principles that they would agree on?
I think that, we have to agree on the importance of the nation, the defense of the borders, of the national borders, but also of European borders. Because when a migrant enter in Greece, he not only enter in Greece, but he enter in European Union. So he can move from Greece to Slovakia. So we have to defend the border from our nation, but also from Europe. We have to defend the concept of nation. We have to defend, we already said that, but I want to underline it again, the Christian roots. And in the same times, we have to try to working on a cooperation, not only from an economic point of view, but also from a cultural point of view. I want to make you an example. I think that can be a good idea to introduce in whole Europe 1 hour a week in the high school of the whole European Union of 1 hour of European culture. So where the student can understand the history of Europe. They can understand which are the most important, writers or poetry of your country, which are the history of your country. Sometimes we don't know nothing about the other country, and it's not good. So I think that if we introduce 1 hour of history of Europe, history and culture of Europe, and 1 week we talk about Slovakia, the other week we talk about Poland, the other week we talk about Portugal, I think that also for the student can be very interesting talking about this kind of topic, but it's important that we only have to talk about culture and history and not politics, because, I mean, in school it's important not to enter the politics, of course.
Sure, thank you. Maybe it's time for a Lexmann report in the European Parliament about entering European history into the curricula across the EU. Maybe not so good a joke, but I tried. Do we have any questions from the audience? Do we have somebody with a microphone? There is a lady here in the first row. Could we have the microphone over to her? Then we'll pass the question over there as well. Ladies first.
Very conservative.
Thank you.
Well, it's our job.
Do you hear me? Yeah. So thank you for this illuminating discussion. My question would be for Miriam. I would like to ask, you mentioned that some European conservative politicians, leaders are now deviating from the Catholic faith and the gospel. Could you please elaborate on that?
Yes.
Examples.
Yeah, example. I mean, for me, for example, when Viktor Orban came to support Lukashenko before the elections, was not in line with what I believe as a Catholic, because the Catholic Church was one of the strongest opposition to the communist regime here in Slovakia, and the regime in Belarus, and I follow it very closely. I am in touch with the Christian Democrats. The leader of the Christian Democrat was already in prison that time, because he was arrested already before the elections. And I don't think that this gives a very good example, because we, as Christians, we are supporting freedom and we are supporting human dignity. And the regime in Belarus is not supporting human dignity and freedom. There are other examples where I can bring up is, for example, the attitude to China. In China is one of the most inhuman regimes currently in our world. And I believe, and this policy was not so much supported by some of the leaders who are leaders of the conservative spectrum, is that we have to be careful what kind of trade agreements we do with regimes like China, for example, because if we are not pursuing and trying to help to improve the human rights situation in those countries through these trade agreements, I think we are failing to do good, which is in our, where we have, we are failing to do the good which we have in our hands to be able to deliver. And I think we have to here really be more stronger, because otherwise I think we are morally co-responsible for the immoral regimes if we are products being done by current slaves, modern slaves in China, for example, in our shops.
We'll take one more question from the audience. The gentleman in the middle, then everybody else who wants to ask a question, do raise your hand so that I can look. Sir?
Dobrý deň. Ja len na začiatku malé upresnenie. Konštantín neurobil z rímskej rímše kresťanský štát, urobil až Theodosius, lebo ten zakázal všetky ostatné náboženstva. To len tak na margo. A chcem sa spýtať, Opakom liberalizmu je totalita. Chcem sa spýtať, že na ktorej strane barikády v tomto boji je konzervativizmus. Môže konzervativizmus konzervovať slobodu napríklad? Ďakujem.
I'll translate very briefly. It's a can you specify, pre koho je to otázka?
Pre pána
Giubilei.
Francesca.
Okay. I will translate very briefly. First, there was a comment. Apparently, it wasn't Constantine who turned Roman Empire into a Christian empire. There was an important role to be played by Theodosius. Theodosius afterwards. So that was the first comment. And second, you can comment on that if you like. And secondly, the opposite of totalitarianism is liberalism. That's the frame of the debate. If that is the case, on which side is conservatism?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, of course. Yeah. I was making an example about Constantine because the Battle of Ponte Milvio is a very important battle, of course. Yes, liberalism is opposite to totalitarianism, but also conservatism is opposite to totalitarianism, and conservatism is totally in favor of the freedom. I mean, the freedom is one of the biggest and the most important part of the conservative values, and usually the conservative people are against totalitarian regime. So, and there is, I mean, a political theory difference between, for example, communism and Nazism and conservatism, because conservatism is not an ideology. Communism and Nazism are an ideology. Conservatism is more a state of nature, a state of the man, is more a view of the society, a view of the world than an ideology. So I think that we cannot compare communism with conservatism, but of course, if you are a conservative in Europe, you are anti-communist, of course, because I mean, communism was a totalitarian regime. And it's very sad that in Western Europe, there's still, I don't know here, I hope no, there are still some communist party. And it's very sad, for example, what is happening in our country in January. In January, the 24th of January, was 100 years that the Communist Party was founded. And the Italian government paid 5 million euros to remember the Communist Party. Because we still have some people that are in our government that came from the Communist Party. And they remember the Communist Party as a good political party. They say, okay, the idea of communism is good, but in the way that they act, they did some mistakes sometimes. But we have to remember what is happening in, for example, 1968 already tell, but also in 1956, when the Western Communist Party, they were in favor of Russia and not from the revolutionary people. So I think that as conservative, we have to underline and we have to fight and saying that communism is a form of dictatorship and is a form of totalitarianism. And so we are, of course, in favor of freedom everywhere, every time.
If you ever needed some famous Slovak dissidents to come to Italy to explain what communism was like, you know, we're very happy to export our experience with how to beat them, you know, how to deal with
I mean, sorry, I can understand that in Italy some people, but also in France, maybe in France more than in our country, they play to be communist. They live in their very, very beautiful house in the city center of Paris or in the city center of Rome. They look at the Colosseum from their house and they say, oh, I'm in favor of Marx, I'm in favor of Lenin, I'm in favor of communism, we have to fight to have communism. But they don't know what is happening in a communist regime. They don't know what are gulags, they don't know how they kill people.
I must give an opportunity for a comment to Miriam as well, whose uncle, great uncle, if I understand rightly, a famous Slovak priest called Mikuláš Lexmann was persecuted by the communist regime in the 50s. So if you want to comment on this topic as well briefly.
Yeah, very, very happy. So what Francesco said, I completely follow the same line, that Marxism or communism is an ideology which is trying to, or was trying to deal with some very crucial economic issues and brought the answers in such a way that the answer to social issues, economic issues are coming from above. That we create a system which answers all the questions in the polity practically. rather than conservatism is bringing the solutions, leaning against truth or what we hope that we believe in truth and truth we are still looking for and trying to understand, and bringing the answers to the concrete questions coming from bottom above. And that's very important, is that the different approach that one comes from above to down and one comes from bottom up. And I believe that the bottom up approach is the only approach, because that preserves the society from the totality of power.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions? One question, two questions. I will take them in a moment. I will just pose one last question from Slido, and then we'll have two last questions from the audience. I think this is a question for Francesco. Where was it? We have mentioned Matteo Salvini briefly a few times, and this question says the following. Matteo Salvini is using religion to promote himself. Change my mind. Would you like to comment on that?
I mean, I think that religion is a personal issue. So who I am to judge him? So I think that he feel Catholic. I for sure know that he go to mass. I know that, but I can't talk about the personal feeling of a person. I'm not no one to say if Salvini is true or is not true. I mean, it's not part of my job to do that.
But I will press on you a little bit more. What is your personal view if you see him waving the rosary in the Italian parliament? Do you find it productive, or just if you were to comment on that?
I think it is his choice. If he decides to do that, he can do that. But I don't like that some media and some people start attacking him every time that everything that he do. Because we're talking about the rosary, but we can talk about other issues. But the same is with Meloni. Everything that they do, they criticize them only because they are center-right leader. And if some people from the center left or from the left do the same things, no one say nothing. I mean, if a politician of the left come in the parliament with the rosario, the day later, all the media say, wow, he's very Christian, look how we underline the importance of Christianity. But Salvini did that, say, oh, Salvini, I mean, you are not Christian, you are racist, or homophobic, and this kind of thing.
Sure,
that's how it works, unfortunately.
Okay, two last questions from the audience. We'll have them both.
Good evening. The first question for Mrs. Lexmann. I would like to ask you as a member of European Parliament, what do you think is the problem and how to fix it in European People's Party when we see that many of MIPs, there is a strong shift that they are not anymore really conservative on the for example, the agenda you mentioned, and many of them are able to support the papers like Matić paper and so on. So what's wrong in the European People's Party and how to fix it? And maybe if you see enough of MIPs who are on the same side in these topics like you, that maybe you could shift the way how the party act. And the second question for Mr. Giubilei, if I were a young Italian Christian conservative, which parties do you think are elective for me and are, let's say, compatible with Catholic teaching and all the social teaching of church and so on? Thank you.
We'll have the answers and then we'll have the next question.
Okay, thank you very much. It is a very difficult question, and I think this doesn't concern only the EPP, it concerns all European political parties. For example, you know that SAS, the Slovak, I mean, they call themselves a liberal party, is in the ECR group, in the conservative group of the European Parliament. The Czech Babiš party is in the Renew, in the progressive group in the European Parliament. So you can see that the groups of the European Parliament, all the political parties, I mean, but the groups even less so, reflect some kind of, you know, like that they share certain political ideas. The political parties or the members who sit in the political parties who are in the party, the European Party, or the members who sit in the groups in the European Parliament, because they are not identical. So I think this is a question at all, that if we are able, as conservatives, Christian Democrats, to push that there will be something where we would really be able to feel home. But I think that needs to kind of reshape the whole spectrum of the European political horizon. And well, I try to maybe make sure that my colleagues do understand that the points of view of our group should adhere to certain values which are set, which are actually still in our documents. I mean, I was an author of the paper which was approved by the EPP group, which says that the Christian democratic roots of the EPP group. The group approved it, but the problem is that no one understands what the values which are written in the paper, what they really mean, and that's, we come back to what Francesco has mentioned, that Benedict XVI, he called relativism as a new type of totality, because practically there is a protection of life or human dignity, and then there is completely different understanding of what it means and what policies support human dignity or protect life, that come from me, for example, or my colleague from another party. So that's the problem, but I don't think it's only a problem of the EPP, it's the problem across the political spectrum, and we have to address it and we have to talk about it, because I think this needs to be understood.
Francesco, very briefly.
Yeah, very briefly. I think Brother of Italy, led by Giorgia Meloni, and Lega, led by Matteo Salvini, in my opinion, these two political parties are the two that follow more the Christian roots. Yeah.
Well, thank you for the answer, and it is my great pleasure to call this event to a close. So I apologize for not being able to answer any questions. Thank you, Miriam, for joining us for the discussion. Thank you, Francesco, for coming
thank you very much.
From Budapest to speak to us, for your lecture and for participating in the discussion. Our guests will be here for the rest of the evening, I hope, and we can continue discussion with a glass of beer. So thank you, everyone, for coming, and I pass the word over to Jay.
Thank you. Let me also... Let me also thank to our host of today's discussion, Samuel. Thank you as well. Dear viewers, dear guests, thanks to you also for being here, and I would like to invite you to our next event that starts very briefly at 8 p.m. So if you have your tickets already, great. If not, feel free to buy them up there at our shop. Thank you, dear viewers, for being here also. And let me also invite you to follow our social media accounts or subscribe to our newsletter, so you can you don't miss all the news about the events from our production and all the others things that we produce and send to the world. I would also like to thank our partners and supporters. Let me once again mention our main partners, Plaut and Lisina Roško and Partners, also our main media partners, Nové Mesto, Konzervatívny denník Postoj and denník Štandard. I would like to invite you to visit our BHD shop that's located up there below the orange canopy, I believe the word is. So feel free to visit the shop, and we have a few interesting books there, and also the magazine, which is called Verbum, and I would like to draw your attention to the magazine because it's a great piece of work. It has more than 160 pages and more than 20 articles, and all that for the very good price of €7. So make sure to go up there and take a look at it. And also, I would like to draw your attention to monumental work of sculpture art, which is on our left. It is made by Alexander Trizuljak, which I believe is Samuel's grandfather, and he is one of the most important representatives of Slovak art. The statue is exhibited here for the first time, and you can find more information in the bulletin, I believe. Okay, this is everything from my part. Thank you once again for keeping your masks at your face, and please continue in doing so. And also I would like to ask you to move behind the red barrier, as we need to clean the chairs in order to proceed with our events. Once again, thank you for being here, and hopefully we'll see each other during our next event. So far, see you. Bye.